Okay, so we have two speakers coming up next. I'm just going to introduce the both of them, and then I will give the floor to them. So first we have Miriam Henry, who has been an assistant Crown attorney for almost 25 years, specializing in youth work. For many years, Miriam enjoyed her role as the team lead of the Crown's office at 311 Jarvis Street and dedicated youth court in Toronto, where her initiatives helped to reduce incarceration rates for youth. While at 311 Jarvis, Miriam case managed young people through such specialty courts as the Aboriginal Youth Court and the Community Youth Court, enabling youth people to reconnect with their heritage and get much needed support for mental health and addiction issues. Miriam also specializes in the intersection of child welfare and youth criminal justice and has worked extensively to facilitate better outcomes for this particular population of youth. Miriam participated in the development of process and practices at 311 Jarvis that improved outcomes for youth. Currently, she is a Crown lead for the Toronto Northwest Justice Centre, an initiative of the Ministry of the Attorney General to create a centre of justice for youth across a sectional collaboration and supported by local community justice service providers. Miriam has been recognized for her contribution to youth justice and has won a number of professional awards for her innovative approach to youth social justice. We also have Mike Brooks, and as the manager of social justice centers at the Ontario Ministry of the Attorney General Criminal Law Division, Mike Brooks works with partners from across sectors and provides expert advice on innovative crime reduction and criminal justice initiatives. In his previous roles at the Ontario Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services, Mike helped catalyze efforts to move the needle in education and employment outcomes for youth through the Collective Impact for Disconnected Youth initiative, piloted in communities across the province. Mike's commitment to involving community in co-creating solutions has twice earned him the Ontario Public Service Amethyst Award for the Youth Action Plan and Long-Term Affordable Housing Strategy, as well as the inaugural MCYS Deputies Den Award. So I welcome you both, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Mike, I think you're on mute.
Of course I'm on mute. Can folks hear me now? Okay. Hi, folks. Pleasure to be here. Miriam and I do, of course, have a set of slides to share. It wouldn't be a government presentation if we didn't have a set of slides. So I will share my screen, but before we do, I think it makes sense just to give a little bit of basic context around what we'll be talking about today, which is Ontario's approach to justice centers. Both Miriam and I work for the Criminal Law Division here at the Ministry of the Attorney General, and we're really careful in the language we select to talk about justice centers. So you won't hear us use language like program. You will hear us use language like court model. And that's actually where we ought to begin today. And I will share my screen. If I can.
Mike, I'm wondering if you could turn your volume up. I see somebody asked to have that turned up.
Certainly I can do that as well. Okay. Is this a little bit better?
I think so.
Okay, thanks, Miriam. Okay. Well, let's begin. We always like to start here, and we use this language of recalibrating, and we really do want to see this work as appropriately recentering human beings in this court process. Through line of our presentation today will be really centering the needs of not only people, but families and communities as well. And we like to talk about justice centers as a way of doing justice a little bit differently. It's a bit of a reimagining of how the court system and the court model in Ontario can work. And of course, we can't do that alone. A core element of our work is working with communities in a way that we can both borrow some lessons learned from, if folks are familiar with the science of collective impact, identify a bit of a common agenda and a common way of approaching these really complex problems. So throughout, you'll also hear us talk about the people that we're working with, the people that have helped us on the way. because truly without them, we would not be anywhere. As well, we're here today to talk specifically about justice and treatment partnerships can help with young people and improve outcomes for young people and their families. Justice Centres in Ontario is beginning with some smaller scale initiatives at the pilot stage, and they're in 4 communities across the province. We're here today to talk about one in Toronto, but there are actually 2 in Toronto, one that has been launched in London, and a 4th that is just on the cusp of being launched in Kenora, Ontario as well. Really importantly, each and every one of those pilots have a different focus. They focus on a different population, and they have tailored interventions that are focused at different points along the continuum of criminal justice. So, for example, in our London Justice Centre pilot, the focus remains on young adults who are disconnected from both school and work, sort of those traditional systems of support for young people. Our focus in the Toronto Downtown East pilot remains on adult chronic offenders who are at that intersection of mental health, addiction, and housing instability and homelessness. And then our pilot in Kenora, Ontario is focused on Indigenous well-being. I'll let Miriam speak to the focus and the realities of our pilot here in the Toronto Northwest. Now, having said that, perhaps we can talk a little bit about what a justice center is. It's not a new model. It's actually been introduced in a number of different jurisdictions across the globe. Some real good lessons learned from Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and of course, we do have just some glimmers of this work beginning in Canada as well. We often talk about justice centers as the combination of 2 main ingredients. On the one side, we've got elements of a problem-solving court model, so something like an adult therapeutic court or a drug treatment court. There are lessons learned from that world. And then we also have a second ingredient, which is more of a community hub model. And there's a real emphasis on co-location of services here. We also expand the definition of what it means to have a focused population to not only include individuals who are accused of a crime and in contact with the justice system through that door, but we also focus quite strongly on victims as well and communities harmed by the offense too. So it is quite a big tent, if I can say it that way. Finally, the thing I will mention here about justice centers is that for Ontario, it does make sense for the provincial government to have quite a strong role. One thing that we're able to bring to the table is not only the mandate to administer justice in the province, but as well the role of convening. We have quite a lot of leeway to bring people together and create new partnerships as well. So I'd ask for folks today who are listening to keep an eye out for how that's actually played out in the Northwest, because there's some really innovative partnerships that simply just didn't exist before this work began. So having said that, I really will just drive home that each of the pilots are different. You'll hear us do a bit of a deeper dive into one of them focused on young people with Miriam, who has expertise in that area today. But if folks are interested in the other pilots, please do follow up with us. We've got the 4 that are either launched or on the just on the cusp of being launched as well. Having said that, I do think it probably makes sense to talk a little bit about our Toronto Northwest pilot. Miriam, I'll control the slides. You can just let me know when to shift over, but perhaps this is the moment where you can tell us a little bit about what we're doing in a large swath of Toronto.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having us. Yes, what you see on your screen now is the map of the jurisdiction that the Toronto Northwest Justice Centre covers. This is the same jurisdiction that the courthouse 2201 Finch Avenue West also covers. There are 6 divisions. And the reason that we take a moment to take a look at this map is that just to have a sense of the amount of different communities that are captured amongst these 6 divisions. It is north of Steeles, east of the DVP, west of the 427, and 22 division goes right down to the Lakeshore. So in that huge geographic area are a number of different communities. If we move to the next slide, the reason we chose this geographic catchment area is because we know that there are a number of communities within this area that have already been identified as areas that need improvement, which means they have been recognized to have systemic chronic issues around housing insecurity that leads to other issues in terms of difficulty accessing education, employment difficulties, etc. So what do we know about the people who live in the Toronto Northwest? We know that there are a high percentage of people who identify as racial minorities. And why is that important? Because we know that people experience the world differently and therefore they experience criminal justice differently, and race is one of the differences. This is also important because we know that there are a number of different communities that have different cultural influences that are in this catchment area. We know as well that there has been during COVID a disproportional impact of COVID on certain communities, those who are in forward-facing jobs, who live in multi-generational housing, who have smaller homes and COVID spreads easier, et cetera. And so we know that there's been a disproportionate impact, and the impact of COVID has been incredibly traumatic. We also know that although all sorts of things stopped during COVID, gun violence did not stop at all, in fact, unchanged. And we do have information about the amount of violence in the Toronto Northwest, the amount of gun violence, and we know that that violence causes significant trauma to the community and to those who actually directly experience the violence, but that we know that many members of the community experience trauma every single time that there is a shooting. So what do we know about 2201 Finch Courthouse? That we know it's not that different from many courthouses, that when young people are arrested and released, there is often a large delay until their first court appearance, somewhere between 6 and 12 weeks, depending on a number of factors. During COVID, that's been manipulated a bit, but there's a big period of time where they are on bail conditions, arrested and released, but yet not before a court. We know that when they do come before the courts, there are multiple adjournments. They need a lawyer. It takes them a while to get a lawyer. They then need to speak to their mothers. They then not sure. The families are not sure. And the process, they keep getting adjourned. We know that young people, when they come into criminal justice, some of them have significant issues. And while the system is slowly trying to manage in terms of retainer and disclosure, some of those young people we know get rearrested while the system slugs along. We also are aware that, and this isn't particular to 2201 Finch, but robbery is a significant charge for young people for a variety of reasons. And in the Northwest, there's a high percentage of young people who come into the system charged with robberies as an indictable personal injury offense. So that's some of the background. And we know that there are systemic factors. We have done a needs review, looked at all the reporting that has been gone on and the research that's done on these particular communities. And we've spoken to people, their lived experience, we've spoken to community partners, and we have a picture of what the experience in the Toronto Northwest is. So if we move to the next slide, what we decided to do is, how are we going to address these issues? So some of the issues that we know is that young people come into courts and they start accumulating charges. We know that young people come into criminal justice and they're dealt with by way of their offense and not by who they are. So if you come into court on a minor offense, the court, write an apology letter and then it's all withdrawn, your problems aren't addressed and you come back into the system yet again. The system responds to the offense. And if it's a minor offense, then they respond to the offense, but not the offender in the same way that we do. So what have we done? We have created a number of pilots to try to tackle the issues that we know exist in criminal law and to have a restorative approach in the process. So the 6 police divisions, what we have done, those officers are now releasing young people directly to the Justice Center for their first appearance. That is a significant change. And that change, they come to the Justice Center at 3 weeks from the time that they are released by the police. Our bail court at 2201 is also releasing young people directly to the Justice Center 3 weeks from the time of their release. Young people are provided information about the Justice Center and they can contact us well before their court appearance. And in fact, we encourage them to do so and some do that. The idea is that they come in on day 1 and they are met by a system navigator, a case manager, a person who does a wholesome, full intake interview of them. And that intake interview is to get a sense of who it is, the person, not the offense. We know that. We get that information from the police. It is who are you and what has brought you into criminal justice. And depending on what the information is gleaned from that intake, there's a set of referrals that happen in the Justice Center. We have a psychologist, a clinical social worker who can do immediate counseling for young people. And when I say immediate, within days of a referral. That's unheard of in criminal justice. That person can do a deeper dive needs assessment. If we determine from our intake that we need more information, that there's more happening. We have an in-house psychiatrist that if we determine that a young person has significant issues that we can, with mental health, that we can have a psychiatrist come and assist them. We have an education advocate who's a lawyer and a social worker and whose job is to link young people back to their education and to deal with expulsion hearings, suspension hearings, credit recovery, and help families navigate the education system. Because one thing we know is that young people are governed by different systems. If they're in care, they're governed by child welfare. All of them are governed by the education system. And when they come into criminal justice, they're governed by their bail orders and their probation orders. And those systems don't speak to each other. And one of the things we try to do in Justice Center is make sure that the systems that are impacting young people speak to each other. So our education advocate is a link into education. And our psychologist and psychiatrist is a link into mental health. And so that we can make sure that they're properly, we know who they are. We know their offense, but we know who they are. Then all that information gets taken and turned into an individualized plan. That is a plan that is culturally appropriate to the person. Are you a boy or are you a girl? Are you a recent immigrant? Are you a third generation? Who are you? What is your racial background? What's your cultural background? And then we try to provide an individual plan to meet your identified needs, housing, education, resume building, whatever that might be, but link it to an organization and a person that you're actually going to relate to. Our individual plans last beyond the criminal charges. Our individual plans have embedded community partners in the Toronto Northwest that have never been traditionally embedded into criminal justice referrals. And so, and that's why they're racially and culturally reflective of the young people that we serve in the Toronto Northwest. Two things happen with this pilot. And the brilliance of this pilot is that young people, if they want to have a trial, can come into the Justice Center, get these services, go right back to 2201 and go through the criminal justice process. And we know in court, in criminal law, a lot of the restorative programs, a lot of the diversion programs are dependent on young people acknowledging the facts that brought them into court. You can have a trial, that's your right. You don't have to agree with what you've been charged with. But we do all know you're 14, you're not in school. That's a problem everybody can agree with. And that's what we're going to work on because your life outcome will be better. The other pilot that we have as part of this, everything is the exact same that I've described. But once we've done all of this work, then we have a really good sense of that young person. And if that young person wants to resolve their charges and the case is an appropriate case for that to happen, we keep it at the Justice Center and we case manage them at the Justice Center and resolve their matters at the Justice Center. We control our dockets, so we call the list in a way that's sensitive to those who are on the docket for whatever reasons they may have. And we are flexible with the return time so that we work around school schedules, etc. We know that by bringing services to young people, we speed up the criminal justice process at 2201, and young people come in the system and out of the system faster, which is one of the things we know is important. For the interest of time, I'm going to move to the next pilot. The next pilot is the robbery pilot. And as I said from the start, robbery is a really interesting charge. And the reason we've chosen this as our charge, because we are offender-based, like we look at the person and we make decisions around the person, but this is an offense-based that allows you to come into the Justice Center. And the presumption is if you want to resolve your matters and you're charged with a robbery, you can keep that case at the Justice Center and do global resolutions with other cases if they're appropriate to bring into the Justice Center. But we've chosen robbery because from a restorative point of view, it's an excellent charge. Young people tend to commit robberies with other young people. So you have a number of accused with the same offense who all come to the court with very differing needs and end up with very differing individual plans because they're very different people. And sometimes there's the leader who planned it, There's the person who's impulsive. There's the person who's standing there. There's lots of reasons why robberies happen. There are gang initiations. There's low self-esteem robberies. There's economic robberies. There's lots of interesting reasons why young people commit robberies. So that's one reason we chose robbery. The other reason is that young people tend to rob young people, not exclusively, but most of their victims are young people. As well, most of the witnesses are young people. Why? Because a lot of these robberies are spontaneous. They happen outside. They happen around their peer group, in and out of school. And so what we know about young people when they're charged with robbery, and we do that deeper dive, they tell us they've been victims of community violence. And so they hang out with groups or they've armed themselves with a knife. And so part of what we do in this pilot is we also look at victims and witnesses. So how does this pilot work? Exactly like the Enhanced First Appearance pilot. You come in on 3 weeks, you have an intake interview, you have internal referrals if need be. So for example, as I've said, if it's determined that you need a cognitive and academic assessment, we can get that assessment ordered, we can give it to our education advocate and make sure that you are properly getting what you need in your school setting, for example. The difference with this pilot is that they stay for resolution and stay for resolution and intensive case management. The other part of this is that we then reach out to the victims and the witnesses, because these young people aren't having trials. They're acknowledging their facts. Whether they plead guilty or not is a whole other thing, because we do sentence mitigation and try to do anything we can to have them accountable, to restore the community, to restore our victim, and also not necessarily have a finding of guilt if that is legally appropriate to do in the circumstances. And so essentially we sort of using a recognizance, a bail order, the same way you use a probation order, so that they're not breached when they're not succeeding. They get case management conferences in our courthouse. We bring people together and see why they're not succeeding and try to help them. They're young people. They're our responsibility. And they're often in the criminal justice system for reasons that are outside of their control. Their systemic fundamental issues that they grapple with are often not of their own making. And it is our responsibility to help them, because robbery is a gateway offense. That young people come in on robberies and they start accumulating charges, and not all of them. Those 5 co-accused come in, some of them you'll never see again. Some of them become your chronic offenders. And so you have to deal with them individually and figure out who is the human being you have before you and how do we help them in order to make sure that they don't come back and into the criminal justice system, but also that they're not harming their community and harming themselves in the process. We reach out to our victims, and part of what's interesting is that our reach out to victims doesn't mean you have to do a program that includes the accused. One of my experience has been that often we offer services to victims and say, if you want to do something, you come with the person who's violated you, and together we'll work through it. And very often victims say no. They like the help. They never want to see the person again. And or at the time they're approached, they're not emotionally ready. That's the court model of, we're at that stage, this is your time for input, and maybe you're not ready for that at that point and you don't participate. We separate that, that victims can have whatever supports we can put together for them, that it's not dependent in any way on interacting with the accused, unless it's an appropriate part of the resolution, and having and unless we have information that that's what a complainant would want. But what is interesting about this as well is we don't just service the accused, because servicing a 15-year-old without looking at their family isn't going to actually help that 15-year-old, because if the forces and the dynamics of the family are part of what has brought him into conflict with the law, he's going to come back into the system again. So part of this pilot as well is reaching out to moms and dads. Do you need help managing? Is there other siblings in the house that haven't been charged that are struggling? Because we can help those young people who are facing challenges. So that's the idea of the robbery court. And this also allows for global resolutions. Part of what we have done is we have helped to develop specialized programming for Black youth around identity, how to navigate toxic masculinity, how to deal with systemic racism. And that you'll hear more about that tomorrow, actually, through Delta Family Services as a fantastic community organization that we work with. But we do have a robbery program that specifically we can refer young people to who've been committed a robbery or charged with a robbery, and who have been identified as having some self-esteem issues and other issues around identity that we think they can benefit from our tailored programming. If we move to the next slide, it's COVID, and you might be wondering, how are we doing all of this? And it's a good point. How are we doing all this? We have had to pivot like everybody else, and we are in community locations. But what we see here on the slide is just a quick summary of everything I've just said. On the upper left-hand side, young people are arrested on robberies or on non-robberies, and they come into the Justice Center. The first thing that they deal with is their defense counsel and or duty counsel. We fast track legal aid. They have a right to counsel their young person. We make sure that the barriers that are there are we expedite it as best as we can. They have their intake interview and referrals through anybody within the Justice Center that they need to see. And those going back to 2201, you can see they go back to 2201. In the middle, you see the wraparound services and tailored programming. And these are, as you can see, we have programming for all sorts of different things. And that's just a sample. We have had over 150 young people come through the Justice Center. We started this in May of this year. We sit 1 day a week. That 150 young people represents over 350 cases. And some of those are young people who've gone back to 2201, young people who've stayed at the Justice Center for resolution. It's a combination of who's come in and received services. The chart at the bottom of this graph is just to basically show we're doing things a lot faster. It's not good for young people to hang around in criminal courts beyond bails, etc. So we move the system as fast as we can. We bring all the services to a young person. And so we can have a young person go through our referral process and be back at 2201 in 3 appearances. And those appearances are 2-week adjournments. Those aren't lengthier adjournments because we want to keep it short, tight, get you the services you need so you're supported while you go through the criminal justice process at 2201 if that's what you choose to do. So the next slide is about our community center, our community locations. What we've done is that we have asked our 2 community partners that we have. So we have Albion Neighborhood Services in the Rexdale Hub, and we have Luminous. And what's happening is that those are community organizations that are up and running through COVID, that are operational, that they physically are in locations that have lots of other services right there. And we have a room in each of those organizations that is a video suite where you can privately, a young person can come to access court in a private, safe way and meet one of our case managers and access court that way. The majority of young people are accessing court through Zoom, through their own technology, but this is for young people who want to, who can't maybe have, they don't have their own technology, or they want to come to speak to their case manager in person. 12, 22, and 23 division are releasing young people to the Rexdale Community Hub, to Albion Neighborhood Services for the first court appearance 3 weeks after release. And 31, 32, and 33 are releasing young people to Luminous, which was also previously known as the Griffin Center. And everybody else, judge, clerks, reporters, myself, we all remote in. And what is really brilliant about this model is if a young person does go physically to that satellite location, they can then turn around and access their employment counselor, and everybody's right there. And so they can access services and get supported. And we have had excellent feedback in terms of what that looks like from young people. They like the safety. They're coming into court in a safe space. So we've had some excellent feedback about how that has impacted the experience of coming to court. So how have we done this? There has been, as Mike mentioned, we have support from the city, we have support from the province, and we have support from the federal government, which is what Brenda is talking about. It's the will of the government. And so this is a unique beginning for justice in Canada. And it is been quite inspirational, I must say, to work on myself, to see the impact we're having on young people and the communities that they come from, and to address them as human beings that are our responsibility, who have found themselves in trouble, and that we provide them the pathway to work themselves out of the traditional consequences that justice would provide to them. And in the process, we ensure their education, we enhance their access to healthcare and to the services that they need, and the supports put in place outlive the criminal charge. And so that is a summary of what we are doing in the Toronto Northwest. I see that there are a couple of questions, I think, and I wonder if there's a question here. that from Olivia, who works as a treatment provider for an agency, and which provides addiction counseling for people in the London Justice Centre, and wondering about any tips on how to ensure that youth make it from the Justice Centre referral to our treatment service and engage in those services. One of the things I think that's helpful is for all young people is that they buy into their own plan. That we can impose plans on young people and tell them they need to go do things, but people need to be part of the plan that is developed, and that is part of the model of London, is finding out who the person is that you're dealing with, and then trying to make that connection with them. I think when people realize that they've come into a system that's trying to deal with them differently, they feel the difference instantly when they come into any justice centre, whether it be London or Toronto Northwest. It's very obvious that everything is designed to help you and support you. And what it is, when you see human beings come into a place that they recognize as safe, they open up, and you watch them over time open up to services and to the people that are trying to help them. Our models all have case managers to make that first human connection. And that, I think, is one of the strengths as well. And every referral is a gentle handoff. And I think that helps. And so I think, how do you encourage young people to come to service and deal with their issues, is to first have them recognize, young people and young adults, what an extraordinary opportunity that they have the power and the agency to work themselves out of their criminal consequence. And it helps people feel that they are in control of their lives, because addiction makes you feel like you're out of control. And if they have supports in place that they can actually make those connections, that's an easier way of encouraging them. I don't know, Mike, if you had anything to add to that.
No, my addition would only be on the logistical side of things. Often what we're doing is we're forging these new partnerships and outroads, if I can call it that, from the justice sector to things like addiction services, mental health counseling, employment, the list goes on, housing navigation. Often we find ourselves, when we've launched these pilots, first mapping just the referral process itself. And we have to learn, because this is a bit of new business for us, learn how organizations would like to receive referrals. And that's an open conversation as well. Is it as simple as a telephone call? Is an email preferred? Is there a template? Those kinds of logistical questions are often things that we find ourselves grappling with. And then once we sort those, we find that referrals flow quite smoothly. And we always say, again, borrowing some language from the collective impact space, continuous communication is key. And just because a referral has been made doesn't mean it's sort of done at that point. There's always a frequent loop back. And as Miriam mentioned, we're lucky enough to have a team of case managers and systems navigators that actually attend court and are able to speak to how young people are doing or how their families are doing directly to the judge and the Crown on record, which is really, really helpful. It's immediate information, it's accurate information, and it's information that folks like Miriam might not have at their fingertips right from the get-go.
I see we have a question about the first appearance. Can they come in by Zoom, or do they have to go to the satellite location? We're flexible. Most young people come in by Zoom. We have the satellite location because we're not sure, not everybody has technology. Not everybody has a safe place to access court from. And so we have our satellite locations for that reason. But yes, they can come in by Zoom. And also, it's all voluntary. They can come in on day one and say they don't want to do anything, and they want to go to 2201, and they don't want to deal with us, and that they can do that. Thankfully, most of them do not do that. And in fact, people are very grateful for the supports. Families are very happy to have some supports, but it's voluntary.
Yeah. And Miriam, I would add to that, we're flexible up until the moment before court. Life circumstances can change at the drop of the hat for young people and their families as well. So while someone may have indicated perhaps to their lawyer they intend on attending via Zoom from home, maybe the day of, they're not able to do that. And for that reason, those satellite locations are there and ready to go, even on a drop-in basis. If someone does have a court appearance and all of a sudden they're not able to log in from home, they don't have a phone all of a sudden, they can show up, someone will greet them, and they'll be connected into court in a safe and private space. Any other questions here?
We do have a couple more questions in the chat. So from an anonymous attendee, is there any hope of a justice center being developed in Durham region or across all jurisdictions if the pilots are successful?
Yeah, I can take that one. It's a common question we get, and in a very real sense, that's the question we need to get to next. Our primary concern is trying to figure out, how do these pilots work? How might they have to be adapted? As I said at the top, each of the pilots are very, very different. So it would not be accurate to say each of the 4 pilots are just a miniature version of a justice center that we're trying in different spaces. They truly, truly are different elements of the model. Once we have a sense of how those things are operating, then it becomes a matter of giving our best advice to decision makers, and then trying to match the elements that are successful that we've learned about in a Kenora or a London or a Toronto Northwest or a downtown East, and matching those to the realities of communities. It's a roundabout way to say, we're not sure where these things will go scale-wise next. What we are sure about is that we're evaluating these initiatives, and I can talk about the evaluation process if that's useful to people. But the short answer is we don't know yet. We're just not there.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Another question we have is, does your wraparound care include primary care and health services?
A resounding yes there. The joy of having folks like a systems navigation team is that they can connect people very, very quickly with things like primary care. And that extends into the mental health space as well. I mentioned at the top that we have a justice center in the Toronto downtown east. This is sort of Moss Park area, folks are familiar, or if you are more familiar with police divisions, it's 51 Division. That model has at its core an element of primary care, to the point where they have on-site nurse practitioners that can help with people who are just on a walk-in basis or maybe need a little bit of help before they attend court. That's true in the Northwest as well. We have systems navigators that can meet with people and get to people wherever they need to go. That includes primary care.
Awesome. Sounds very accessible.
We also have emergency psychiatric services. We've had some young kids who've been unfortunately in significant psychosis and significant distress, and our psychiatrist is linked with the treating psychiatrist in the hospital they're in. And so we've linked these two systems that don't speak to each other for a young person in absolute distress, and actually get the court orders we need. And we had all of that done within a 24-hour period. It's unheard of. But that is the benefit of what we're doing, is trying to break down the silos. Young people fall through the cracks in between organizations and professionals who don't speak with each other. And that's part of what we do, is breaching those gaps. I see there's a question about other justice participants other than judges. I'm not sure what that exactly means, but yes, there is room we're interested very much in any other additional community partners that are doing work that relates to what we're doing, initiatives around education, initiatives around health, any in terms of working directly with young people. So anybody on this line that's interested, I've already put my contact information in the chat. Reach out and let me know if you're doing something that you think links with what we're doing. And I'm not sure what other justice participants other than judges. We have duty counsel as part of the Justice Center, and I'm there as the crown for the Justice Center, and I'm not sure what other justice participants that person is referring to.
It might be worth mentioning that on a given court day, we've got our systems navigators that attend court and can speak to the progress that a young person may have made. But depending on a young person's individual plan, our education advocate may attend as well. Perhaps maybe we paint a little bit of picture of who all is in court, because admittedly it's a different look. It's a different look and feel. We have more faces. We
ask all service providers to come if they're interested and they want to. So if somebody, instead of having a lawyer say he's done 6 sessions of counseling, you have a counselor come in and say he's been really good, and it supports young people. They feel that the system navigator is on their side. The people that are working with them are working for them and with them, and they feel supported. And so some young people ask that the people they're working with come in court, and we invite everybody. If you want to bring your best friend because that person makes you feel comfortable, bring them. Bring anybody you want to court with you. It's important that you feel safe and comfortable, because we're trying to reach you, and you can't reach people when they're stressed. regardless of their age. So what makes
Mhm.
them most comfortable, and you bring that person with you. And it's a community around a young person. We want to have that whole community come together and help put that young person, restore them back into where they should be. And so we're trying to deal with the community around that young person. And so they should be part of our process, and they are part of our process.
Excellent. So the next question is, how would a referral work for a young person who lives in another region but is charged in the jurisdiction of the Justice Center? Would that person still be eligible for services?
Yes, we have the ability to service young people remotely. So they'll be like, if they live elsewhere, they can always remote into court, but we will set up an individual plan for what they can access geographically. So absolutely, yes. As long as your offense is in our jurisdiction, we will service you.
Excellent. Just a couple comments here that I want to read out. Something from Cindy E said, when our youth acknowledge the wrongdoing, that is the first step. Treating our youth with respect and providing a safe, supportive environment for our youth is key.
Can I make a comment just on that? We're lucky enough to have some wonderful judges that come to the Justice Center. And Miriam, I'm hoping you can follow on this comment as well. One thing we've heard of late is the judges have been noting that young people feel more able to speak directly to them when they're given the opportunity to do so. Whereas, as I understand it, Miriam, you'll know better than I, in other cases, they may not make any comments and just sort of have the process, in their words, done to them rather than being an active participant. Miriam, is that kind of your feeling when you go to court each week?
I think that's true. We have dedicated judges, so our kids are in front of the same judge. And so there's a familiar face. That's part of what we're doing. We're all familiar faces. She's a lovely woman, Justice Lori Montague, and Justice Grinberg. And what they have done by their approach and our approach is it's very clear to people this is a safe space because they watch how the judge interacts with people and interacts with them. And then over time, they feel confident to speak up in court. So we do find that young people are much more apt to speak than they otherwise would, but it's because they're feeling supported, and it's clear that it's not an adversarial process, and they can feel that. Although they don't know the word adversarial, they can feel the difference. They know, and so over time we watch them open up. And when I talked about calling the docket in a restorative way and in a helpful way, if I know there's somebody filled with anxiety about the process, it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to call you right away. You just take the camera off and just quietly watch what happens, and it's incredibly helpful because they go, okay, you're not all here to punish me. Part of what we do as well is there's an informality in that all the service providers, that we're all on first names. I have been doing that for many years, long before Justice Centers, but I think it's really important that you know my name, I know your name, and you can call me by my first name. And so that begins to break down those barriers, and people relate to you more as a person when you're not approaching them with your title. And so that is one thing that we certainly also do in court. And when people watch all of that happening, it just feels like a completely different experience and they react to it differently.
Absolutely. Thank you both very much for your time. It sounds like an excellent program, and it's hopefully going to make a big difference, and we can see it across a wide range of jurisdictions in the future.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
You as well.